In 1961, the United States government mailed 22 million booklets telling families exactly what to stockpile before the bombs fell. Most of that list has been quietly forgotten. Today, preppers spend thousands on tactical gear that needs batteries, software, and a working supply chain to even turn on. But the gear that actually kept people alive through depressions, blackouts, and world wars cost almost nothing and never needed charging. Number 14 on this list survives an event that would turn every modern gadget you own into a paperweight. And number 3 has been feeding humans for 3,000 years. These 25 tools were so reliable that entire industries replaced them with things that break. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 forgotten doomsday survival tools every prepper must have. Number 25, the Dietz Hurricane Lantern. Before the LED flashlight, before the headlamp, there was a steel lantern with a glass globe and a wick that drank kerosene. The Dietz company started making them in 1840, and the design barely changed because it did not need to. A single fill of kerosene burned for up to 45 hours, throwing a soft amber light across a whole room without a single battery. Your great-grandfather hung one in the barn, set one on the porch, and kept one by the bed. It cost about $1.50 in 1940 and lasted 3 generations. The genius was simple. There was nothing to charge, nothing to update, nothing to fail. When the storm knocked the power out for a week, the family that had a lantern and a can of kerosene ate dinner in warm light while everyone else fumbled in the dark. Modern flashlights die in an afternoon. This one outlived the people who bought it. Number 24, the hand crank radio. When the grid goes down, information becomes the most valuable thing on Earth, and the people who survive are the ones who can still hear the outside world. The hand crank radio solved this without a wall outlet. A small dynamo inside turned the motion of your wrist into electricity. 1 minute of cranking bought you 15 to 20 minutes of broadcast. During the war years, families gathered around the set to hear bulletins, and in the Cold War, Civil Defense built an entire emergency band around the idea that ordinary people needed a way to listen when everything else failed. The modern versions add a solar panel and a USB port to charge a phone, but the principle is 100 years old. No subscription, no tower required to reach you, only one still standing somewhere to transmit. A prepper without a way to receive news is a prepper guessing in the dark. This little box meant you never had to guess. Number 23, the ferro rod and magnesium block. Matches get wet, lighters run out of fluid, and crack in the cold. But a rod of ferrocerium scraped with a steel striker throws a shower of sparks at 5,000 degrees, wet or dry, at sea level or on a freezing mountain. The military issued magnesium fire-starting blocks to pilots and soldiers precisely because they worked when nothing else would. You shaved a small pile of magnesium off the block with a knife, then struck the embedded rod, and the sparks ignited the shavings into a blinding white flame hot enough to light damp tinder. One block could start thousands of fires. It never expired, never leaked, and weighed almost nothing in a pack. Frontier trappers carried flint and steel for the same reason a century earlier. Fire was survival. Fire was warmth, clean water, cooked food, and a signal. The man who could always make fire was never truly helpless, and a $2 block of metal guaranteed it. Number 22, the Carbide lamp. This one looks like something from a steampunk dream, but it lit the deepest coal mines in America for decades. The Carbide lamp held 2 chambers. Water dripped slowly from the top onto calcium carbide pellets in the bottom, and the reaction produced acetylene gas, which burned at a bright, steady flame through a tiny jet, focused forward by a polished reflector. Miners wore them on their helmets 100 years ago, casting light into places the sun had never reached. A pound of carbide cost pennies and burned for hours. What made it brilliant for survival is that it needed nothing electrical at all, only water and a rock-like fuel that stored for years in a sealed tin. Cavers still swear by them today because the flame also tells you when oxygen runs thin. It is a flashlight, an oxygen monitor, and a hand warmer in one brass shell, and almost nobody under 60 remembers it exists. Number 21, the wool military surplus blanket. Synthetic sleeping bags are warm until they get wet, and then they are useless. Wool is the opposite. It insulates even when soaked because the fibers trap air against your skin, no matter how damp they get. For 2 world wars, armies issued heavy wool blankets to soldiers in freezing trenches and mountain passes because nothing else kept men alive through a wet, bitter night. A single dense wool blanket could be a coat, a bedroll, a stretcher, a pad against the cold ground, or, wrapped tight, the difference between hypothermia and morning. They were nearly fireproof too, throwing off sparks instead of melting like a nylon bag would. You could find them at any Army surplus store for a few dollars well into the 1980s. They last for 50 years if you keep the moths out. A prepper who trades a wool blanket for a cheap synthetic one has traded survival for the feeling of being modern. Number 20, the solar still. When the taps run dry and every bottle is gone, clean water becomes the line between living and dying, and the solar still pulls it straight out of the dirt and the air. You dig a pit, place a container in the center, lay green vegetation, or even contaminated water around it. Then stretch a sheet of clear plastic over the top with a small stone weighing the center down. The sun heats the pit. Moisture evaporates, condenses on the underside of the plastic, and runs down to drip clean and pure into your container, leaving the salt, the bacteria, and the poison behind. Castaways use this. Desert survival schools still teach it. It produces water slowly, maybe a quart a day per still, but it never breaks, never clogs, and costs nothing but a sheet of plastic you already have. The technology is just sunlight and patience, the 2 things that never run out. Number 19, the hand crank grain mill. You can store 1,000 pounds of wheat berries in sealed buckets, and they will last 30 years without spoiling. But whole grain is useless to you until it becomes flour, and an electric grinder is a brick the moment the power dies. The hand crank grain mill solved this for centuries. You clamped it to a table, poured the berries in the hopper, and turned the heavy iron handle, while stone or steel burrs crushed the grain into flour, as fine or as coarse as you wanted. Pioneer families brought these across the plains in their wagons because a mill meant the difference between a sack of seed and a loaf of bread. A good cast iron one cost a few dollars and outlived the homestead. It asked nothing but your own arm. The prepper who stockpiles grain without a way to grind it has stockpiled birdseed. The mill is what turns it back into a meal. First pattern break. Here is where the truth about survival gear gets uncomfortable. Almost everything sold to preppers today shares one fatal flaw. It needs electricity, a battery, a charger, a cell signal, an app, or a factory still running somewhere to make the replacement parts. None of those things are guaranteed to exist after the event you are preparing for. That is the whole point. The gear on this list comes from a world that had already lived through the worst, the depressions, the world wars, the dust bowls, and the blackouts that lasted weeks. And the people who survived those things did not survive because of something that plugged into a wall. They survived because of tools that ran on muscle, fire, sunlight, and gravity. Forces that do not stop working when the grid does. We forgot this gear, not because it failed us, but because for 70 comfortable years, we never needed it. Comfort is the most dangerous thing a prepper can own. Number 18, the gravity-fed ceramic water filter. Long before plastic squeeze filters and electric purifiers, there was a stack of ceramic candles in a stainless drum, and it cleaned water using nothing but the weight of the water itself. You pour dirty water into the top chamber, and it seeped slowly through microscopic pores in the fired ceramic, pores so small that bacteria and parasites physically could not pass, dripping clean into the chamber below. British Army field hospitals used ceramic filtration in the 1800s. It needs no power, no pump, no cartridge that runs out in a week. When the ceramic clogs, you scrub the surface with a brush, and it works again for years. A single set of elements could filter thousands of gallons. While everyone else hoards bottled water that runs out, the family with a gravity filter can drink from a creek, a rain barrel, or a puddle and never get sick. Clean water is the first thing you lose and the first thing that kills you. This is the answer. Number 17, the signal mirror. A piece of polished metal the size of a playing card has saved more lives than almost any electronic beacon ever made. The signal mirror reflects sunlight into a focused beam that can be seen from miles away. A flash bright enough that search planes have spotted downed pilots from over 20 miles out. Air crews carried them in survival kits through every war of the 20th century. The best ones have a small sighting hole in the center, so you can aim the flash precisely at a rescuer or a passing vehicle. It needs no battery, no signal, no satellite. It works on nothing but the sun. The same heliograph principle moved messages across the American frontier before the telegraph reached the West. In a true collapse, when phones are dead and there is no one to call anyway, a flash of light is still the oldest distress signal humans recognize, weightless, indestructible, and visible to the horizon. Number 16, the Snare wire trapping kit. A rifle is loud, draws attention, and burns through ammunition you cannot replace. A snare works silently while you sleep. A coil of thin brass or steel wire bent into a simple noose and set along an animal trail catches rabbits, squirrels, and game without you ever being present. Trappers built the economy of the early frontier on exactly this, and indigenous peoples perfected it over thousands of years. A single roll of snare wire weighs almost nothing and sets dozens of traps. You place them where animals already travel, near burrows and water, then check them at dawn. While the man with the gun hunts all day and finds nothing, the man with 20 snares wakes up to meat he caught in his sleep. It is the most efficient protein per effort tool in the entire survival world, and it costs less than a cup of coffee. Quiet, passive, and endlessly reusable. Nothing about it can run out. Number 15, the Treadle sewing machine. When the stores close and stay closed, clothing stops being something you buy and becomes something you maintain, repair, and eventually make. The Treadle sewing machine ran entirely off a foot pedal that rocked back and forth, spinning a wheel by a leather belt, with no electricity anywhere in the design. A Singer Treadle from 1920 still sews a perfect stitch today, and millions of them are sitting forgotten in basements and barns. Pioneer women made every shirt, coat, and quilt their family wore on machines exactly like this. You could patch a torn coat, restitch a worn boot, sew a wound shut in an emergency, or turn old fabric into something useful again. In a long collapse, the ability to repair clothing instead of replacing it is the difference between staying warm and falling apart. The grid cannot touch it. The supply chain cannot strand it. 100 years from now, that iron machine will still be stitching, while every electric one has rusted into nothing. Number 14, the galvanized trash can Faraday cage. This one protects against the event most preppers fear the most and understand the least. A high-altitude nuclear detonation or a massive solar storm, like the one that fried telegraph lines in 1859, releases an electromagnetic pulse that can destroy every unshielded electronic device for hundreds of miles in an instant. Phones, radios, generators, vehicle electronics, all dead at once. But a simple galvanized steel trash can, lined with cardboard so nothing touches the metal walls, becomes a Faraday cage that absorbs and redirects that pulse around its contents, leaving everything inside untouched. Faraday discovered the principle in 1836. The military builds entire shielded rooms on the same idea. A spare radio, a backup phone, basic electronics sealed inside that $20 can could be the only working technology for 100 miles after the pulse. While everyone else stares at dead screens, you reach into a trash can and pull out a working world. It is the cheapest insurance policy in all of prepping. Second pattern break. Here is what the people who run the power grid already know and rarely say out loud. The North American electrical grid is one of the most fragile systems ever built, held together by aging transformers that take years to manufacture and cannot be quickly replaced. A coordinated attack, a severe geomagnetic storm, or a single cascading failure could take large regions dark for months, not hours. Government studies have wargamed exactly this, and the conclusions are grim enough that most of them never reach the public in plain language. The uncomfortable truth is that the entire modern survival industry is built on the assumption that help arrives in a few days. The gear on this list comes from an era that assumed the opposite, that you were on your own, possibly for a long time, and that nobody was coming. That assumption built tougher people and tougher tools. We replaced both with the comfortable belief that the lights always come back on. They usually do, until the one time they do not. Number 13, the pitcher pump. Turn a tap today and water appears, but that water is pushed to your house by electric pumps at a treatment plant. Cut the power, and the taps go silent across an entire city. The pitcher pump never had that weakness. A simple cast iron hand pump mounted over a shallow well or a driven point. You worked the long handle up and down, and a leather plunger drew water straight up from the ground by suction. No electricity anywhere in the chain. Every farmhouse in America had one in the yard before rural electrification, and many still sit capped and forgotten over perfectly good wells. A few dollars a pump and a length of pipe gave a family unlimited clean groundwater for as long as the well held. While the city goes thirsty waiting for the grid, the homestead with a hand pump fills its buckets the same way it did in 1890. Water that comes up by your own arm cannot be shut off by anyone. Number 12, potassium iodide tablets. This small cheap pill is the one item on this list designed for a very specific nightmare. If a nuclear reactor melts down or a weapon detonates, the radioactive iodine released spreads on the wind and lodges in the thyroid gland, where it can cause cancer for decades afterward, especially in children. Potassium iodide floods the thyroid with safe, ordinary iodine so it cannot absorb the radioactive kind, a protection that has been part of civil defense planning since the Cold War. Governments stockpile it around every reactor for exactly this reason, and after major nuclear accidents, demand for it spikes overnight as people realize too late that they have none. A bottle costs a few dollars and lasts for years on a shelf. It is not protection against radiation in general, only that single specific threat, but it is the only protection that exists, and you cannot get it once the event has already happened. Always talk to a doctor about proper use, because dosing matters, and it is not for everyone. Number 11, the Haybox cooker. Fuel is precious in a crisis, and the Haybox cooker stretches it further than seems possible. You bring a pot of beans, stew, or grain to a hard boil for a few minutes. Then you seal it inside a heavily insulated box, originally packed tight with hay, and today lined with blankets or foam. The stored heat finishes the cooking over the next several hours with no fuel at all. The food simmers itself while you do everything else. European households used these through both world wars when coal and wood were rationed, and they could cut cooking fuel by more than half. A pot of dried beans that needs 2 hours of constant flame instead boils for 10 minutes and then cooks itself in the box all afternoon. It never burns the food, never needs tending, and turns a tiny amount of fuel into a hot meal. In a world where every stick of firewood counts, the Haybox is free cooking, captured heat that would otherwise float away into the cold. Number 10. The wood-burning cook stove. When the gas line dies and the electric range goes dark, the family with a cast iron wood cook stove keeps cooking exactly as it did 100 years ago. These massive stoves were the heart of every kitchen before the 1950s, burning wood or coal to cook food, heat water, warm the entire house, and even dry clothes on a rack above. One appliance did the work of 5, and it ran on the most renewable fuel on Earth: fallen branches and split logs. A good stove built in 1920 still works perfectly today because there is nothing in it to break, only iron and fire. The flat cast top held a dozen pots at once, and the oven baked bread, as well as anything modern. They were torn out of millions of homes when electricity made them seem old-fashioned, hauled to the scrapyard by the thousands. The people who kept theirs or hunted one down at a farm auction hold the one appliance that does not care whether the grid exists. Number 9. The pressure canner. Refrigeration depends entirely on electricity, and the moment the power dies for good, everything in your freezer spoils within days. The pressure canner makes food shelf-stable for years without a single watt. By sealing food in glass jars and heating them under high pressure, the canner reaches temperatures hot enough to kill the bacteria that cause spoilage and botulism, something boiling water alone cannot do for meats and vegetables. A jar of canned venison, beans, or garden tomatoes sits safely on a shelf for years at room temperature. Farm families preserved entire harvests this way, putting up hundreds of jars every autumn to carry them through winter when nothing grew. A heavy cast aluminum canner cost a few dollars and was passed down through generations. While everyone else watches their frozen food rot in a dead freezer, the family with a pressure canner eats from a pantry wall stacked with a full year of meals. It is how you store abundance when the machines that usually store it have stopped. Third pattern break. Here is the thing nobody in the survival industry wants to admit because there is no money in it. Real preparedness is not about gear at all. It is about skills and the willingness to do hard things with your hands. You can own the finest grain mill ever made and starve beside it if you never learn to bake bread. The reason all of this got forgotten is that for 3 generations, Americans were paid to specialize, to be good at one narrow job and buy everything else. And a population that buys everything has forgotten how to make anything. Our great-grandparents could grow food, preserve it, sow, build, hunt, heal, and repair, not because they were heroes, but because there was no other choice. Every one of those skills lived in ordinary people. We traded all of it for convenience and called the trade progress. The gear matters only in the hands of someone who knows how to use it. The most important survival tool you own has always been what you know. Number 8. The root cellar. Before refrigerators, Americans stored a whole winter of food underground, and they did it with nothing but a hole in the earth. A root cellar uses the constant cool temperature a few feet below the surface, around 50 to 55 degrees year-round, to keep potatoes, carrots, apples, cabbages, onions, and squash fresh for months without any power at all. The ground itself was the refrigerator. A well-built cellar dug into a hillside or beneath the house could hold hundreds of pounds of produce through the harshest winter, the food slowly resting in cool darkness exactly as nature intended. Every farmhouse had one, and entire communities depended on them to survive until spring. They cost nothing but labor to dig, and once built, they ran forever on geology alone. We filled them in and forgot them the moment the electric fridge arrived, never thinking about the day the fridge might stop. The earth has been keeping food cold for free since the beginning of time, and it always will. Number 7. Tallow candles and the candle mold. When the last battery dies and the last drop of lamp oil is gone, you can still make light from animal fat, the way humans did for thousands of years. Tallow, rendered from beef or mutton fat, was the cheapest light source on the frontier. It was poured into a tin candle mold around a length of cotton wick and left to harden into candles that burned for hours. A single cow yielded enough fat to light a home for weeks. Beeswax made finer candles, but tallow was free, a byproduct of every animal a family raised or hunted. The skill of rendering fat and casting candles meant a household never sat in total darkness, no matter how long the crisis lasted, because the raw material walked in on 4 legs. The candle mold itself was a simple set of tin tubes that lasted a lifetime. While the prepper who hoards store-bought candles eventually runs out, the one who can render tallow makes light forever from the same animals that feed him. Number 6. The whetstone. A dull blade is a useless blade, and in a long crisis, every knife, axe, and tool you own slowly goes dull with use. The whetstone is what keeps them alive. A flat stone of fine grit, used with a little water or oil, restores a razor edge to any blade through nothing but patience and the right angle, a skill every man and woman once carried in their hands. Frontiersmen, soldiers, farmers, and butchers all kept a stone close, because a sharp edge meant safer, faster, more efficient work, and a dull one meant injury and waste. A good natural whetstone lasts for generations and never needs anything but water. In a world where you cannot buy a new knife, the ability to keep your old one sharp is worth more than a drawer full of cheap blades that all go dull at once. It is the quietest, humblest tool on this list, and without it, every other cutting tool you own slowly becomes a club. Number 5. The ham radio. When cell towers fall silent and the internet goes dark, amateur radio is how the world keeps talking. A ham radio operator with a transceiver and a wire antenna can reach across a state, across the country, even around the globe, bouncing signals off the upper atmosphere with no cell network, no provider, no infrastructure between sender and receiver beyond the air itself. During every major disaster of the last century, when modern communication collapsed, it was ham operators who relayed emergency messages, coordinated rescues, and connected the cutoff to the outside world. The hardware is decades old in design and built to last, and paired with a hand crank or solar charger, it runs entirely off-grid. In a true collapse, information is power and isolation is death. The family that can listen and transmit knows what is happening 50 miles away, knows what roads are safe, knows whether help exists. Everyone else is alone in a silence they cannot break. A radio turns that silence into a lifeline. Number 4. Pemmican and hardtack. Long before freeze-dried survival meals in foil pouches, there was food engineered to last for years and travel anywhere, invented by people whose lives depended on it. Pemmican, perfected by indigenous peoples of North America, was dried meat pounded into powder and mixed with rendered fat, and sometimes dried berries, a dense calorie-rich brick that could last for years without refrigeration and sustained explorers, trappers, and entire winter camps. A small piece delivered enormous energy, the original survival ration. Hardtack, the simple cracker of flour and water, baked until every drop of moisture vanished, fed armies for centuries, and could survive a decade in storage, hard as a stone, until soaked soft in coffee or stew. Together they were the original go-bag food, shelf-stable protein and carbohydrate that needed no cold, no cooking, and no packaging factory. While the prepper relies on expensive pouches with expiration dates, these two foods, made at home from fat, meat, and flour, have outlasted the people who made them for 3,000 years. Number 3. The cast iron Dutch oven. This is the single most versatile cooking tool ever made, and it has been feeding humans the same way for 3,000 years. A heavy cast iron pot with a tight lid, the Dutch oven bakes bread, simmers stew, fries, roasts, and boils set over a campfire buried in coals, or perched on a wood stove with no electricity and no replacement parts ever. Pioneers prized them so highly that wills specifically listed who would inherit the family Dutch oven. You can pile hot coals on the flat lid to bake from above and below at once, turning an open fire into a full oven anywhere on Earth. Seasoned properly, the iron becomes naturally non-stick and only improves with age, a pan that genuinely lasts forever and gets better the more you use it. It survives being dropped, burned, frozen, and ignored for decades, then cleans up and cooks again. Every other piece of cookware you own will eventually fail. This one will be cooking dinner long after you are gone. Number 2, salt. It seems too simple to matter, but salt has started wars, built empires, and decided who lived through the winter. Before refrigeration, salt was the only way to preserve meat and fish for the months when no fresh food existed, drawing the moisture out of flesh so bacteria could not grow, turning a slaughtered hog into a year of bacon and ham. Roman soldiers were sometimes paid in it, which is where the word salary comes from. A family with a barrel of salt could preserve an entire harvest of meat, brine vegetables into food that lasted all winter, and keep their animals healthy. Without it, even a successful hunt rotted within days. It never spoils, never expires, and stores indefinitely in a dry place. Yet almost no prepper stockpiles nearly enough of it. In a long collapse, salt becomes currency because everyone needs it and no one can make it without the sea or a mine. The cheapest item on this list may be the one you trade for everything else. Number 1, the Heirloom Seed Bank. At the top of this list is the only tool that does not just keep you alive, it rebuilds the entire world after everything else is gone. A collection of open-pollinated heirloom seeds is a survival kit for civilization itself. Unlike the modern hybrid seeds sold in stores, which produce one crop and then fail to grow true the next year, heirloom seeds breed faithfully, generation after generation. That means a single packet, properly saved, becomes an endless supply of food. You plant, you harvest, you save the best seeds, and you plant again forever. For 10,000 years, this was simply how farming worked. Every family kept its own seeds, passing varieties down like heirlooms because that is exactly what they were. We surrendered that independence to a handful of companies. They now own the seeds the whole world plants, engineered so you must buy them again every single year. A jar of heirloom seeds breaks that chain completely. It is the difference between eating for one season and feeding your grandchildren. Every other item on this list helps you survive the disaster. This one is how you outlast it, the quiet, ordinary miracle of a seed that contains the next harvest and the one after that, all the way to the horizon. Nothing in human history has ever done more with less. Here is the challenge. Pick one thing on this list and actually get it this week, not someday. This week, the lantern, the wool blanket, the bag of heirloom seeds, the box of salt. Then learn to use it before you need it, because gear in a closet is not preparedness, it is just clutter. Drop the one you are starting with in the comments. I want to know if the hand pump gets more love than the Dutch oven, and whether anyone out there still has their grandparents' root cellar, because these were never just gadgets, they were independence. And independence is the one thing nobody can sell back to you once it is gone.